Over the last decade, the environmental movement has sharpened its tone from a plea for conservation into a demand for immediate survival. Young leaders now address global elites with uncompromising urgency, framing the crisis as an immediate threat to their existence. Far beyond individual speeches, this urgency manifests in massive, coordinated demonstrations across Europe. The defining message of these crowds centers entirely on a rapidly expiring clock, placing time itself at the forefront of their demands. Contrast that ticking clock with the traditional machinery of international politics. For decades, the standard response to global warming has been diplomatic consensus, non-binding targets, and incremental treaties signed years before any promised action takes place. This creates a strange paradox. Today, public consensus on the reality of climate change is exceptionally high, with vast majorities acknowledging the threat. Yet, the policy actions required to actually cut emissions remain sluggish and routinely miss their targets. Frustrated by this political inertia, activist groups escalate their tactics. By deliberately disrupting the daily flow of traffic and commerce, they attempt to force a physical break in a system committed to business as usual. What these activists are trying to solve is a problem of timelines. Recognizing a distant catastrophe is locked in by current economic growth, they compress that timeline, dragging consequences backward to crush the present moment. These apocalyptic narratives function as calculated sociological mechanisms, engineered to bridge a massive cognitive gap in how human beings perceive long-term danger. By projecting catastrophic risk into the present day, the climate movement attempts to engineer a sense of historical agency, manufacturing the political will to force immediate policy shifts before the clock completely runs out. The human brain evolved to process fast, localized violence. We react instantly to a dangerous predator, a sudden fire, or a falling object. We are not neurologically wired to process slow, distributed, systemic threats that unfold over generations. Philosopher Timothy Morton categorizes climate change as a hyperobject. A hyperobject is an entity so fastly distributed in time and space, like all the plastic in the ocean or global carbon emissions, that it completely defies standard human perception. Dipesh Chakrabarty defines human time by short-term metrics, election cycles, profit reports, and human lifespans. This opposes planetary time, which operates in millennia, tracking tectonic shifts and accumulating greenhouse gases. The climate crisis is the violent collision of these two previously separate timelines. We see this collision when a planetary-scale weather anomaly manifests as a sudden, localized disaster. In places like the R Valley, the illusion of safety within human time is shattered overnight by the physical reality of planetary time. Because traditional politics operates strictly within the short-term boundaries of human time, it is inherently blind to the geological scale of the crisis. Activists, therefore, have to find a way to make planetary time politically visible. This creates an operational problem. How do you manufacture immediate, urgent political agency for a threat that will peak long after current politicians are out of office? The climate movement bridges this gap using a specific rhetorical tool called a chronoference. A chronoference brings an anticipated future into present-day dialogue, tying distant consequences to current decisions. Activists use the future past, asking us to look backward from a ruined future, reframing our current moment as the point of fatal course was locked in. Prominent voices in the German climate movement, like Luisa Neubauer, prioritize this exact temporal framing. They consistently articulate that the policies being enacted right now will become the history that future generations suffer through. Framing the present as a future past strips policymakers of plausible deniability. It forces them to answer in the present for the specific historical legacy they are currently creating. Chronoferences weaponize time itself. They strategically convert abstract, distant risks into immediate, undeniable political liabilities that demand an immediate response. For a chronoference to work, the projected future must be severe enough to shatter the comfortable illusion that we can simply adapt through minor adjustments. This bar chart visualizes qualitative coding data from sociological interviews with climate activists. When asked to conceptualize tomorrow, their responses heavily index towards futures of risk and dystopia, towering over concepts of utopia or preservation. Operating from this dystopian projection, activist groups frame existing fossil fuel infrastructure as an active existential threat. They argue it must be dismantled entirely to avoid a catastrophic outcome. This reliance on apocalyptic scenarios perfectly mirrors the literary evolution of climate fiction, or cli-fi. Cli-fi is a genre of literature that explicitly explores the social and psychological consequences of global warming. Cli-fi deliberately isolates the psychological trauma of environmental breakdown. Where standard IPCC reports offer dry statistics and probability curves, fiction provides the emotional devastation of a solitary survivor in a ruined city. Both activists and authors frequently rely on the concept of an irreversible ecological tipping point, a critical threshold that, once crossed, leads to unstoppable changes. Pointing to this threshold manufactures a hard, unyielding deadline. This dystopian engine is a highly effective rhetorical tool. By constantly amplifying the worst-case scenario, it shocks the political system and demands emergency intervention over slow, incremental adjustments. This strategy represents a stark departure from the past. Throughout the 20th century, major social and political movements mobilized support by striving towards a designed, hopeful utopia, a clear vision of a better society. The theory assumes a dystopian forecast creates public awareness, which translates into policy action. But does this doomsday certainty accelerate change or trigger a psychological break? As the chart fractures, a thin line mobilizes, while a massive block drops into eco-anxiety, fatalism, and polarization. The psychological backlash is severe. When audiences are exposed to constant doom without being given actionable, adaptive frameworks, they default to paralysis. If the apocalypse is already locked in, taking action feels entirely pointless. There is a sociological backlash as well. Highly disrupted activism often clashes with the daily routines of working citizens, causing the public to recategorize protesters as polarizing folk devils who threaten the social order. To counter this paralysis, sociologists propose an alternative framework called the preservation of the future. This model requires coupling the awareness of severe risk with specific, viable structural adaptations that protect standards of living. Dystopian chronofrences are absolutely necessary to shatter societal ignorance, but failing to pair that apocalyptic push with an adaptive, hopeful pull leaves the public with nowhere to go. Without a vision and survival worth fighting for, we risk trading our complacency for total societal resignation.